Quick question before we start. Name a four-wheel drive van. Not the LiteAce, not the Sprinter. Struggling? That's the entire video. These are the 10 toughest four-wheel drive vans nobody talks about. And I mean that literally, because half of them barely have an English language write-up anywhere online. A German shop bolted actual G-Wagen axles onto a delivery van because a hotel owner needed his guests up a mountain. A French factory built a dog clutch system in 1984 that almost nobody driving today has heard of. And they all lead somewhere. The system sitting at 1 on this list is the one every other entry gets compared to, including the G-Wagen axle van at 4, which we'll come back to directly when we get there. If you only know one van on this countdown, it's probably that one. Let's find out why everyone forgot the other 9. Number 10. Nissan Vanette. Before Nissan leaned on Mazda to keep this nameplate alive, the Vanette was a Nissan-engineered van in the truest sense, built by the company's own Aichi manufacturing division from 1978, with four-wheel drive offered as a genuine factory option from the earliest generations. It's the van nobody outside Japan's used export market has ever heard of, because it was never sold new in North America and rarely made headlines anywhere else. The four-wheel drive Vanette wasn't built for adventure marketing. It was built because small businesses and tradesmen across rural Japan needed a cab-over van that could handle unpaved roads to construction sites, farms, and fishing ports without switching to a truck. That's a humbler mission than off-road glory, and it shows in how the Vanette four-wheel drive survived, as a working tool that quietly outlasted flashier competitors in export markets like Malaysia, where it stayed in service long after Japan moved on. What made it capable wasn't complexity. The drivetrain layout was straightforward. Front-mounted engine, mechanical four-wheel drive engagement, no electronic nannying to fail in the mud. That simplicity is exactly why so many of these vans are still running on rough roads, decades after most of their two-wheel drive siblings gave out. The cab-over layout also mattered more than most buyers realized at the time. By pushing the driver forward over the front axle, Nissan gave the Vanette a tighter turning radius than a conventional front-engine van of the same footprint, useful on switchback farm tracks where a wider turning circle simply meant reversing back out. Nissan never chased the export volume that made the LiteAce and Delica household names in the countries this channel's audience calls home. The Vanette stayed a domestic and regional workhorse, and its four-wheel drive variant stayed almost entirely undocumented in English. That's not a flaw in the vehicle, it's just what happens when a genuinely capable van never needed a marketing department to prove it. There's also a naming quirk that adds to the confusion for anyone researching this van today. The Vanette wore different badges depending on where it sold. Sunny Vanette, Cherry Vanette, or simply Nissan Van in the American market that briefly imported it. A single vehicle scattered across half a dozen names makes it exactly the kind of van that falls through the cracks of automotive history, even though the four-wheel drive hardware stayed consistent across every badge it wore. It never got the cult following of the vans further up this list. No overland Instagram account is going to feature a Vanette four-wheel drive. But that's the whole point of this entry. It did the job it was built for, in total anonymity for over a decade and a half, and nobody thought to write it down. Anyone actually driven a four-wheel drive Vanette off-road? Drop your story below. Number 9. Subaru Sambar van. Here's a fact that sounds made up. This K-Class Japanese microvan puts its engine in the back, drives all four wheels, and shares its basic mechanical DNA with a vehicle nicknamed the Porsche of K-Vans for that exact rear engine layout. Nobody talks about the Sambar's four-wheel drive system because it exists in a category most Western viewers have never had to think about. Japan's K-Class where the entire vehicle has to fit inside dimensions smaller than a compact car. Subaru added four-wheel drive to the Sambar van around 1979 and 1980, aimed squarely at farmers who needed to reach fields that regular roads didn't. By 1987, the fourth-generation Sambar Tri upgraded to a full-time four-wheel drive system, a genuinely sophisticated setup for a vehicle this small, engineered to stay engaged on high-traction surfaces without binding or excess wear. That same generation also introduced ventilated front disc brakes to the four-wheel drive Sambar line, the first K-truck or van in Japan to get them. A genuine engineering first buried inside a vehicle most people outside Japan will never see in person. The rear engine, rear independent suspension layout wasn't just a quirk. It gave the Sambar a flat load floor and tight turning circle that made it a favorite with small-scale farmers navigating narrow rural roads. Combine that with four-wheel drive traction, and you get a van that could go places it's boxier. Front-engine competitors simply couldn't follow, all while carrying a full load in a footprint smaller than most modern hatchbacks. The engineering trade-off was real, though. Putting a four-cylinder engine over the rear axle for traction meant less crumple structure back there, and Subaru had to balance that against Japan's evolving key-class safety standards across every subsequent generation. One reason the platform kept getting revised, even as its core formula stayed remarkably consistent for over 3 decades. The naming inside Japan's own market adds another layer of obscurity. When equipped with full-time four-wheel drive, Subaru sold the van under the G-Wagen trim name, meaning the exact vehicle described in this entry might not even show up in a search for Sambar four-wheel drive, unless you know to look for its premium sub-brand. That kind of internal badge splitting is common in Japan's K segment, and nearly guarantees a vehicle stays invisible to anyone outside the domestic market. It's since become a cult favorite among 25-year import buyers in North America, chasing something genuinely different from the usual JDM-K truck. But for most of its working life, the four-wheel drive Sambar van did its job in total obscurity, hauling tools and produce down mountain tracks nobody was filming. Rear engine, rear-mounted, four-wheel drive, and it's smaller than a Miata. Would you daily drive one? Number 8. Toyota TownAce / LiteAce. Everyone who's watched our HiAce video knows Toyota's biggest van earned its reputation the hard way. Almost nobody remembers that Toyota built a smaller, genuinely capable four-wheel drive van sitting right beneath it in the lineup. And it's been in continuous production, in one form or another, since 1970. The TownAce and LiteAce occupied the gap between the compact K-adjacent vans and the full-size HiAce, and Toyota offered four-wheel drive variants across multiple generations, including diesel-powered versions with a proper high-low transfer case, and, on later models, a limited-slip rear differential for extra traction off pavement. This wasn't a marketing trim level. It was genuine mechanical hardware, aimed at buyers who needed to reach places the two-wheel drive version simply couldn't get to. What kept it out of the spotlight was positioning. The HiAce got the export volume and the reputation. The TownAce and LiteAce stayed close to home markets and Southeast Asia, doing unglamorous work as school shuttles, rural taxis, and small business haulers. By 1999, later trucks in the lineup even moved to full-time four-wheel drive, quietly refining a system nobody outside Japan was paying attention to, alongside standard anti-lock brakes and optional airbags that most competitors in this segment still hadn't caught up on. Part of what makes this entry genuinely obscure is the naming history itself. Toyota unified what had originally been two separate model lines, the LiteAce and TownAce, over successive generations, rebadging trucks and vans back and forth between them through the 1980s and 1990s. Even dedicated Toyota enthusiasts outside Japan struggled to keep the generational family tree straight, which is exactly why the four-wheel drive variants buried inside that lineup have gone almost entirely undiscussed. Toyota also sold a related upscale wagon variant, the Master Ace Surf, between 1982 and 1992, adding yet another badge to an already tangled family tree. The regional split mattered mechanically too. Southeast Asian and Middle Eastern buyers, who made up a large share of TownAce/LiteAce demand, often prioritized rough road durability over passenger comfort, a very different priority than the Hi-Ace's largely Western export customer base. That divergence gave Toyota room to keep refining the four-wheel drive hardware quietly, without needing to market it the way the Hi-Ace's off-road capability eventually got marketed abroad. It's not the van that gets the countdown headlines. But if you've ever wondered what Toyota does with a four-wheel drive system when it's not trying to sell you a legend, this is the answer. Everyone knows the Hi-Ace. Nobody remembers its little brother had four-wheel drive too. Number 7. Renault Trafic. At the end of 1984, Renault quietly introduced a four-wheel drive version of its Trafic van, and unlike several other vehicles on this list, this wasn't a specialist conversion house bolting on hardware after the fact. This was Renault's own engineering, using a part-time system built around a dog clutch to engage the rear axle, the same fundamental mechanism the company had already proven on the Renault 18 4x4 passenger car. The system was deliberately simple, front-wheel drive under normal conditions, with the driver manually engaging the rear wheels only when needed, paired exclusively with the diesel engine and a 5-speed manual gearbox. No complicated electronics, no center differential to fail, just a mechanical link that worked or it didn't. On the 4x4 variant, Renault also moved the rear axle further forward than on the standard front-wheel drive Trafic, a chassis change made specifically to balance the weight distribution once the rear wheels were carrying drive torque. Renault built the Trafic as a workhorse van first, and it shows in how the 4x4 variant was marketed, not as an adventure vehicle, but as a practical option for postal routes, utility companies, and rural trades, operating on roads that turned to mud every winter. It became the mechanical base later used for early American Winnebago conversions, though those chassis cab versions were typically the two-wheel drive variant, sold under names like the Lasharo and Itasca Phaser. Because the 4x4 system was tied exclusively to the diesel engine and manual gearbox combination, Renault never had to over-engineer it for a wide range of drivetrain configurations. Every 4x4 Trafic left the factory with the same proven mechanical layout. That kind of narrow, deliberate engineering focus is common in military and agricultural vehicles, but rare to find in a commercial delivery van built for ordinary postal and trade routes. The mid-1989 facelift that reshaped the Trafic's front end and softened its plastic bumper didn't touch the underlying 4x4 mechanicals. Renault kept the dog clutch system unchanged for the rest of the model's run, a sign of confidence in a design that didn't need revisiting once it worked. That kind of quiet stability, without a single major drivetrain revision across the entire production window, is rare in an era when most manufacturers were racing to add complexity rather than leave a working system alone. It never got the recognition of Volkswagen's or Steyr-Puch's more famous systems from the same era. But Renault built a genuinely rugged, no-nonsense 4x4 delivery van in 1984 and let it disappear into commercial obscurity, which is exactly why it belongs on this list. A dog-clutch 4x4 system in a 1984 work van, engineering nobody expected from a delivery vehicle. Number 6. Fiat Ducato Dangel. Roughly 2/3 of the motorhomes built in Europe sit on a Fiat Ducato chassis. Almost none of their owners could tell you that a small French company in the Alsace region has been quietly building a 4x4 version of that exact chassis for decades, and that as of the 2015 generation, you can order one straight from the factory. That company is Dangel, founded in 1980 by a former racing engineer who started out converting Peugeot sedans and has since built over 22,000 four-wheel drive vehicles most of Europe has never heard of. Their Ducato system uses a central viscous coupling to send power to the front axle only when the rear wheels start to slip. No driver input required, no bodywork changes, and critically, no modification to the fuel tank or exhaust system underneath. The engineering constraint is almost as interesting as the system itself. Dangel's 4x4 conversion only fits the lighter Ducato variants, capped at 130 to 150 horsepower, and can't be paired with an automatic transmission or the longest wheelbase options. It's a system built for balance, not brute force, which is exactly why it stayed under the radar while doing serious work underneath thousands of European camper conversions. The complete 4x4 transfer system adds around 150 kilograms to a vehicle that can weigh 3.5 tons fully loaded, a trade-off Dangel's engineers accepted deliberately to keep the driveline durable rather than shaving weight at the expense of longevity. What makes this entry different from most of the others on this list is scale. Dangel didn't just modify one van. Fiat's own confidence in the partnership eventually led the company to offer the conversion as a factory option, something almost no other aftermarket 4x4 converter in Europe has achieved. That's a level of manufacturer trust built over decades of proven reliability, not a single flashy prototype. Dangel's relationship with Stellantis family brands runs deeper than just the Ducato too. The same company converts the Ducato's badge-engineered siblings, the Citroën Jumper and Peugeot Boxer, built on identical platforms at the same Seville factories, along with smaller vans like the Citroën Berlingo and Peugeot Partner. That breadth means Dangel's viscous coupling engineering has quietly ended up underneath thousands of vehicles, wearing 3 different manufacturer badges, while the company itself remains almost completely unknown outside the trade. You've probably driven behind one of these on a mountain pass without ever knowing it had 4 driven wheels. That's the quietest kind of overbuilt there is. A French company most of you have never heard of built the 4x4 system for Europe's most common motorhome base. Wild that it's this obscure. Number 5. GAZ-27057 Gazelle. Since June of 1994, the GAZ factory in Nizhny Novgorod has built a van most of the world has never seen in person, and the 4-wheel drive version, properly designated the GAZ-27057, took that obscurity even further by adding a genuine off-road drivetrain most Western viewers assume Russian commercial vans simply didn't have. The 27057 rides on the same Gazelle platform as the standard delivery van, but with real hardware changes. Ground clearance raised to as much as 240 millimeters, depending on body configuration, a 5-speed manual gearbox, paired with an optional 2-speed transfer case, and a solid front and rear axle setup that traded on-road refinement for the ability to keep moving where Russia's back roads simply stop being roads. This wasn't built for enthusiasts. It was built because huge stretches of rural Russia don't have paved access, and small businesses, hunters, and oil and gas workers needed a van-shaped vehicle that could actually reach them. GAZ leaned into that market hard enough to offer a factory-order fiberglass body option with even more ground clearance for the buyers who needed it, alongside a heavy-duty steel ladder frame borrowed directly from the platform's military vehicle lineage. The Gazelle family's broader reputation for durability plays into this entry too. The base platform has spawned somewhere around 60 documented modifications and variants over its production run, from armored bank transport versions to municipal service trucks. The 27057 sits inside that sprawling family tree as the version built specifically for terrain, rather than payload or passenger count, And it's exactly the kind of variant that gets lost inside a catalog that large. The naming/designation situation compounds the obscurity problem for anyone trying to research this vehicle in English. The base GAZ-27057 designation gets used loosely across import listings and enthusiast forums to describe the entire panel van family, while the specific 27057 4x4 badge rarely appears outside Russian-language technical documentation. Number 4. Mercedes-Benz T1/TN. Mercedes-Benz never built a factory four-wheel drive version of this van. Every single 4x4 TN/T1 on the road was converted after the fact by a small handful of German and Austrian specialists, and the best known of them didn't even start with off-road ambitions. It started because a hotel owner in the Alps needed to get his guests up a mountain safely. That's the origin of Iglhaut Allrad's 4x4 conversion business. Fritz Iglhaut had been a truck driver in the 1950s before opening a Mercedes dealership with his sons in 1965. When that Alpine Hotel commission came in during 1983, the Iglhaut team didn't design a new drivetrain from scratch. They raided the parts bin of one of Mercedes' most famous off-roaders. Front and rear axles, drive shafts, transmissions, and transfer cases all lifted from period Mercedes-Benz G-Wagons and adapted to fit the TN/T1's chassis. The results spoke for themselves almost immediately. An Iglhaut converted van reportedly finished second overall in the Liberty Raid Rally from Cologne to Khartoum to Cairo, a brutal transcontinental event where a converted delivery van was competing against vehicles purpose-built for exactly that kind of punishment, and nearly beating all of them. Iglhaut wasn't alone in this either. Other Austrian and German specialists, including Ober-Einer and Larag, ran their own versions of the same conversion, using the same G-Wagen donor parts, meaning an entire cottage industry quietly built genuine off-road capability into ordinary work vans, using componentry borrowed from one of the toughest vehicles Mercedes ever made. That overlap between converters is exactly why researching a surviving 4x4 T1/TN today is genuinely difficult. Owners on Mercedes enthusiast forums routinely have to reverse engineer which company built their specific van by examining the axle hardware and transfer case, since Mercedes never issued factory documentation for any of it. The entire 4x4 lineage exists almost entirely in oral history, forum threads, and the memories of the shops that built them. Iglhaut's business has since expanded into converting modern Sprinter vans for the American market, using patented off-road gear descended directly from this original TN/T1 work. A direct engineering lineage running from a 1980s Alpine Hotel commission all the way to vans on American roads today. Nearly 2 decades of production, hundreds of thousands of units built, and the 4x4 versions are still hard enough to research that Mercedes enthusiast forums argue over which converter built which specific van. That's about as far from mainstream recognition as a genuinely capable 4x4 gets. A delivery van running actual G-Wagen axles, built because a hotel owner needed to get guests up a mountain. Wildest origin story on this list? Number 3. Bedford CF2. Britain built its own Ferguson coupling four-wheel drive van in 1984. The same fundamental technology behind the most famous 4x4 van of the entire era, and almost nobody outside the UK commercial vehicle trade has ever heard of it. When Bedford's CF range was superseded by the CF2 in 1984, a genuine factory 4x4 option appeared on the order sheet, using a Ferguson viscous coupling system. Drive ran permanently to the rear wheels, with torque transferring progressively to the front the moment the rear wheels started to slip. No driver switch, no locking hubs to remember, just a coupling doing its job automatically, engaging and disengaging shock-free as conditions changed underneath it. This wasn't a boutique option for adventure buyers. The 4x4 CF2 went straight into service with the British military, ambulance trusts, and fire brigades. Vehicles that needed to reach accident sites and rural call-outs, regardless of what the road surface looked like. Bedford even offered a high-rise package on top of the standard 4x4 setup, raising the chassis and flaring the arches to fit larger tires for buyers who needed even more clearance. The timing worked against it from the start. Bedford's commercial vehicle business was already in decline by the mid-1980s, and General Motors wound down the division entirely by 1986, meaning the 4x4 CF2 had barely 2 years on the market before the whole Bedford commercial nameplate disappeared. Low production numbers from a short window mean surviving examples are now genuinely rare finds, even among UK classic commercial vehicle collectors. That short production window is exactly why so little written record of the 4x4 CF2 survives today. Owners searching for information routinely turn to enthusiast forums and eBay listing descriptions rather than any official Bedford literature, since the vehicle's entire market life came right as the company that built it was already being wound down, a rare case of a genuinely capable factory system arriving just before the lights went out on the whole nameplate. Bedford's broader collapse makes the CF2 4x4's obscurity almost inevitable in hindsight. General Motors ultimately sold off the entire Bedford commercial vehicle operation, and the brand that had once been Britain's best-selling van maker simply stopped existing within a few years of the 4x4 option's debut. Number 2. Iveco Daily. Long before Iveco's modern factory 4x4 Daily started showing up at European truck shows, a small Italian off-road specialist called Scam SRL was already building four-wheel drive dailies back in 1995, taking the standard 4x2 van and giving it a genuine off-road drivetrain almost nobody outside Italy's commercial vehicle industry ever heard about. That early conversion effort laid the groundwork for what Iveco eventually brought in-house. After a 2011 concept, the fully redesigned factory-built Daily 4x4 launched in 2013 with a live rigid front axle on taper leaf springs, replacing the earlier independent wishbone setup entirely. The result was a ladder frame, solid axle 4x4 van with mechanical locking differentials on both axles, plus a center differential lock. 3 genuine locks on a vehicle most people would never look at twice in a parking lot. Unlike unibody competitors like the Ford Transit or Volkswagen Crafter, the Daily's ladder frame construction meant it could take real structural abuse, and Iveco leaned into that with a payload capacity that dwarfs anything from the 1-ton Ute segment it occasionally gets compared to, up to roughly 4,100 kilograms on the heavier 7.0-ton chassis variant, a figure that puts serious pickup trucks to shame. The Daily's roots trace back to 1978 as a heavy-duty extension of the Fiat Ducato range, sharing Fiat's platform lineage, but built with rear-wheel drive and a true truck-style ladder frame instead of the Ducato's front-wheel drive layout. That shared ancestry with the Dangel converted Ducato at number 6 on this list isn't a coincidence. It's the same Italian commercial vehicle engineering culture, solving the same traction problem 2 different ways, decades apart. Even the modern factory version hasn't had a smooth road. Australian buyers of post-2019 Daily 4x4s have reported ongoing mechanical issues, serious enough to prompt legal disputes with Iveco, a reminder that reviving a genuine off-road drivetrain after years of dormancy isn't always a clean engineering handoff. Number 1. Volkswagen Vanagon T3 Syncro. Every van on this list found its own path to four-wheel drive. Renault's dog clutch, Dangel's viscous coupling, Iglhaut's G-Wagen parts bin. This one is the most complete factory engineering effort of them all, and it's the van most of this channel's audience already half recognizes without knowing why. Released to the market in 1985, the Vanagon Syncro used a Ferguson formula viscous coupling system, engineered in partnership with Steyr-Daimler-Puch, the same Austrian specialists behind the Pinzgauer and the Haflinger. The front axle engaged automatically and progressively as the rear wheels lost traction. No driver switch required, no manual engagement to forget in the moment it mattered. Volkswagen specifically chose not to reuse the older Quattro-style system already running in sister company Audi's lineup, opting instead for the Ferguson system, originally developed in Britain and proven on Jensen sports cars. Final assembly happened not at VW's main Hanover plant, but at Steyr-Daimler-Puch's own facility in Graz, Austria, a detail that tells you exactly how seriously Volkswagen treated the engineering handoff. Buyers could option front and rear locking differentials, controllable from inside the cab while moving, compensating for the rear engine layout's inherent lack of axle articulation. It won its class outright at the 1991 Australian Safari Rally, on a chassis most people assumed was built for camping, not competition. Two distinct versions reached buyers: a 14-inch wheel model and a more heavily engineered 16-inch variant with a longer wheelbase, bigger wheel arches, stronger drive shafts, larger CV joints, and bigger disc brakes. Essentially a second round of reinforcement layered on top of an already serious system. Even without factory diff locks, the standard Syncro's substantially reinforced underside and skid protection meant it could take punishment. Most vans of its era simply weren't built to survive. Production never spread far beyond Europe and the vehicle's core export markets, but the cars that did reach North America and Australia built an outsized reputation relative to their numbers. Decades later, the Syncro name still moves the market for the entire T3 generation. Over its production run through July 1992, Volkswagen and Steyr-Daimler-Puch built roughly 43,000 Syncro variants across vans, pickups, and campers. A small number for a mainstream automaker, but enough to build a cult following that's kept these vans alive, restored, and still climbing mountain trails 4 decades later. From dog clutches to G-Wagen axles, to a purpose-built viscous coupling system assembled at an Austrian off-road specialist's own plant. 10 vans. A German shop that raided a G-Wagen's parts bin. A Soviet platform still working roads that barely qualify as roads. And, at the top, the one factory system that did it all without outside help. None of these got the mythology of the trucks we usually cover. They just did the work in anonymity for decades. Subscribe. We'll keep finding the ones nobody else is covering.